Rick Wilson had a pretty good upbringing in a nice home with two younger siblings and great parents. He did well in school, getting mostly A's, and was really into sports, which made him pretty popular in high school. He only went through a couple of rough patches growing up. The first tough time was when his high school girlfriend, who he thought he might marry someday, dumped him right before the junior prom. She hit him with the classic line, "I think it's important we see other people to make sure we really love each other." Then, Carrie showed up at the prom with her new boyfriend, a guy already in college. It took almost the whole summer and a lot of support from his family to get over seeing her dancing and kissing this new guy at the dance. About a year later, Rick was playing for his high school baseball team when a line drive smacked him right in the ear. The bone around his ear got busted up, leaving him deaf in that ear. And to make matters worse, the recovery time kept the college scouts from checking out his pitching skills. The scholarships Rick had been banking on to get through college never came through. With no scholarship in sight, Rick ended up at a state college. He'd just kicked off his junior year when the Twin Towers fell. On September 14th, Rick walked into the local Army recruiter's office with every intention of signing up. It never crossed his mind that he might not be eligible. He was a tall, solid guy, standing 6 foot and weighing in at 190. He could pump out 260 pounds on the bench press and blazed through the quarter mile in 58 seconds. The recruiter gave him a handshake and some kind words, saying, "Thanks, son. We'd have been lucky to have you on the team." But then came the rejection, all because of that deaf ear. Rick kept that rejection to himself. There was no real reason for it. He had nothing to be ashamed of with his hearing loss. But somehow, he couldn't shake that feeling of not being good enough, and it ate away at him for years. After earning his degree in finance, Rick landed a job at a local branch of the growing bank, Washington Mutual, in 2003. The mortgage market was booming at the time. Rick found himself closing about 12 mortgages each week, along with several second mortgages and home equity loans. With the economy on the upswing, Rick felt proud knowing he was helping people achieve their dream of homeownership or use their home equity to buy things like boats, new cars, or swimming pools, luxuries that were once out of reach for many working-class folks. A year after graduating, Rick crossed paths with Stacy Wallace. He was playing outfield and batting cleanup in an adult baseball league when he spotted the cute brunette in the stands, dressed in a modest blouse and not-so-modest summer shorts, chatting with one of his teammates' wives. After the game, Jeff and Jenny introduced Rick to Stacy and invited him to join them for a drink at the local pub. As Rick and Stacy sat at the table with their drinks, waiting for Jeff and Jenny, who were chatting with another couple at the bar, Stacy initiated the conversation. "It's been at least 3 years since I've been set up like this," she remarked. Rick chuckled. "They didn't even try to be subtle, but that's fine by me. I hope you're okay with it." Stacy laughed next, and Rick noticed how her bright blue eyes sparkled. "More than okay. Actually, much better than the last time." Without being mean, he was pretty much full of himself. I couldn't get a word in as he bragged about how great he was. "Well, it's understandable. He was trying hard to impress a beautiful lady." Stacy blushed. "Oh, compliments instead of bragging? Is that your approach?" As soon as she said it, Stacy blushed even more than before. Her cheeks were practically on fire as she apologized. "I'm sorry, Rick. That came out wrong. I'm a little nervous here." "Nervous? What's got you nervous?" "I've been nervous since Jenny pointed you out on the ball field and said we were going out afterwards. I watched you play and wondered if you'd be disappointed." Rick looked at Stacy, puzzled. She was a vision of beauty, standing at 5'7", maybe 120 pounds. How could she not know how attractive she was? "Why would I be disappointed?" Stacy, still on her first pint and letting her mouth run ahead of her brain, blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Well, just look at you. You're gorgeous." Rick felt his cheeks heat up. Now it was his turn to blush. "Oh, compliments! Is that your secret weapon?" It was the perfect timing for Jeff and Jenny to return to the table. Jenny glanced between them, trying to decipher if this was another of her matchmaking mishaps. "What's going on?" Jeff shot Jenny a warning look, ready to scold her. "I told you to stay out of it." But before he could say anything, Stacy jumped in. "Thank goodness you two came back. Rick and I were about to embarrass ourselves for years to come." Jenny, feeling puzzled, defaulted to her usual tactic when she was unsure. "Come with me. I need to use the restroom." She grabbed Stacy's arm and led her to the bathroom. Rick glanced at Jeff. "Restroom?" Jeff could only shake his head. 3 years of marriage to Jenny taught him when to keep quiet. "Don't ask." "Got it." Rick finished his drink, noticed Jeff's glass was nearly empty. and ordered two more from the passing waitress. I like her. She's funny, pretty, and there's something about those eyes and that smile. Jenny will be thrilled. She's not had much luck with this stuff. Can you enlighten me on why she's still single? The same reason as you. There are plenty of jerks and users out there. It's tough to find the right person. You seem to have found that someone. I admire you and Jenny. Jeff grinned in return. I'm one lucky guy. So, do you think things went well in there? Rick nodded toward the restroom door. I'd be surprised if they didn't. I was observing you two while I was at the bar. There's definitely a connection. Jeff glanced up. Here they come. The two women returned to the table, both with wide smiles. If there were any doubts, Stacy dispelled them when she scooted her chair a bit closer to Rick's. The four of them chatted, laughed, and drank for the next couple of hours. That was the beginning. Rick and Stacy became a couple that evening. Stacy taught junior high language arts, formerly known as English, and was taking graduate courses during the summer. Despite Rick's busy work schedule of over 50 hours per week at his desk, often with late nights at the branch, they still managed to spend every weekend together and at least 2 nights during the week. Their love story blossomed. Just like in any good love story, there were challenges to face. The biggest one was Stacy's dad, Colonel Wallace. He was a tough army guy who didn't think much of civilians, especially civilian men who never served. Rick thought about explaining why he didn't serve, but he knew the colonel's strong opinions wouldn't change. Luckily, Stacy didn't share her dad's views, and he didn't interfere with their relationship. Neither of them had much experience in the bedroom, but they put an effort to please each other. With practice and a desire to make each other happy, things got better in the bedroom. Their connection wasn't just physical. Rick and Stacy realized they shared many values and dreams for the future. They talked about how many kids they wanted and how they would raise them, whether as Catholics or Methodists. But what mattered most was that their children grew up with good morals to navigate life's challenges. 6 months into their relationship and 5 months after committing to each other, Rick proposed to Stacy. She said yes, and 4 months later they tied the knot and jetted off to Jamaica for their honeymoon. Rick kept it to himself. But the most enticing moment of his life was when his conservative wife boldly took off her top one morning at the public beach. Seeing a few other women do the same gave her the courage to reveal her under the top in public, much to Rick's delight. It was like something out of a cartoon, with his eyes nearly popping out of his head. Their week in the Caribbean, with its sun, sand, warm water, drinks, and food, was the perfect way for these young lovebirds to begin their married life together. Rick was amazed that such a stunning woman, both inside and out, had agreed to spend her life with him. While wading in the clear water one day, Rick couldn't help but notice how Stacy's eyes sparkled with the same blue hue as the Caribbean Sea. He imagined growing old with her, as long as those eyes continued to smile at him. That evening, as Stacy removed the sundress she had worn to dinner, Rick felt incredibly fortunate. Stacy had only been with 2 lovers before Rick. She was one of those rare girls who made it through high school and her first 2 years of college as a virgin. Both boys had been clumsy, lacking the skill or equipment to please her. Every peak Stacy had experienced before Rick had been achieved on her own. Now, that was a thing of the past, as Rick was an attentive lover. Once the honeymoon ended, they returned home with a commitment to build a life together. Looking back with perfect vision, it's easy to criticize the choices Rick and Stacy made in the following years. But if all the experts at the Federal Reserve Bank, the Treasury Department, Congress, the White House, and nearly every financial institution missed the impending disaster that led to the Great Recession, can we really expect more from a couple who trusted those same experts? In 2007, like many other young couples that year, Rick and Stacy felt the pressure as home prices skyrocketed to outrageous levels. Worried about missing out, they made a rash decision to buy a house at the peak of the market. Why keep throwing money away on rent when they could start building equity? The house they purchased, a modest 3-bedroom bi-level, would have likely been priced at $200,000 back in 2003. But by the time the Wilsons bought it in 2007, after winning a bidding war, the closing price had soared to $420,000. Their realtor assured them they were fortunate to snag it at such a bargain price. Right after they sealed the deal on their first house and mortgage, Stacy proposed what seemed like a genius plan to both of them. She'd take a year off from teaching to finish her master's degree in just 1 year instead of spreading it over 3 summers. Plus, she'd use that time to get pregnant and spend a few months with the baby before returning to work. With her master's, she'd earn a higher salary and could teach high school. They mapped it all out on paper. The schedule, the finances, the practicalities. It all looked good. Rick was excelling in his job, having recently received a nice pay raise and bonus, so they figured they could pull it off. Everything was going according to plan, like clockwork. Then, in late November, Stacy informed Rick that her period was 3 weeks late, and she bought a pregnancy test kit to confirm it. The timing couldn't have been better. The baby was due in mid-July. Stacy could enjoy a couple of months with the newborn before returning to teaching, just as they had envisioned. But as they say, the best-laid plans often go astray. In April of 2008, the mortgage market started falling apart, leading Washington Mutual to shut down branches and lay off staff, especially in the mortgage departments. Rick was one of those let go. After 5 months of unemployment, Rick finally found a job as one of 2 assistant managers at a discount store. The pay was about half of what he used to make at the bank, and the assistant managers had to rotate shifts monthly and share weekend duties. On May 15th, Stacy went into labor, delivering Amy Wilson 7 weeks ahead of schedule. It took 3 weeks before the Wilsons could bring Amy home to the nursery they had prepared. Hospital bills piled up, and while Rick's COBRA insurance covered some costs, it fell short of what his previous plan would have paid. Stacy still managed to graduate that semester and landed a teaching job at the local high school. This allowed her 10 weeks at home with Amy before the school year began. Stacy's mom agreed to watch Amy while Rick was on day shifts at the store. The Wilsons were juggling 2 incomes, yet they found themselves grappling with an overwhelming pile of bills. Despite their efforts, their home's value had plummeted below their mortgage, leaving them trapped with no viable option to sell. Amy's ongoing health struggles, marked by colic and frequent ear infections, deprived the family of much-needed sleep, compounding their financial woes and straining the once solid bond between Rick and Stacy. With Rick's erratic work schedule, including shifts from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. every other month, and frequent weekend obligations, their time together dwindled, reducing their relationship from partners to mere cohabitants. As Stacy embarked on her second year as a high school teacher, the introduction of Kyle Turner, the new phys ed instructor, added a new layer of tension. Kyle's imposing stature, standing at 6 feet 3 inches and weighing in at 220 pounds, coupled with his rugged appearance and perpetual hint of a beard, quickly drew the attention of female colleagues. Gossip swirled among the staff, intensifying the strain on the Wilsons' already fragile marriage. During the prep days, which were 2 weeks before classes started, most people dressed casually. Stacy wore shorts that weren't too short, but still showed off her long tan legs. Her top was also flattering, unbuttoned just enough to reveal a hint of cleavage if she bent over. Once classes began, she couldn't dress like this. But after spending the summer getting back to her pre-pregnancy shape, she felt she deserved to flaunt a little. Encountering a hunk like Kyle Turner on the first day caught Stacy off guard. Kyle noticed Stacy's legs, cute face, as well as the rings on her left hand. The rings didn't bother him. He actually preferred married women. For Kyle, the allure of closeness without commitment added to the excitement. Kyle's pursuit of Stacy started slowly on the first day, as he had plenty of time. He was already involved with his neighbor, a biology teacher at the school, so he wasn't driven by horniness. For Kyle, the thrill was in the chase. The rumors began circulating during that first week, but nobody knew their origin. According to hearsay, Kyle was said to be a former Special Forces Ranger or Navy SEAL, and everyone who heard the tale was impressed and believed it to be true. Kyle's demeanor alone exuded that aura, the aura of a man who had faced danger and returned home, ready to guide young men to follow in his footsteps. Kyle didn't start the rumors. He wasn't foolish. However, he never confirmed or denied anything regarding his 3 years in the Navy. His silence only added to the mystery surrounding him and made him appear humble. The reality was that Kyle Turner spent those 3 years working at a supply depot within the country. It was a suitable job for him. He discovered soon after enlisting right out of high school that he disliked military life. Working at the supply depot meant he never had to engage in combat or be near any action. It also allowed him to spend a couple of hours in the gym on the base every day. There's no shame in how Kyle spent those 3 years. If only he'd been forthcoming whenever questioned about it. It seemed like fate was against the Wilson marriage when both Stacy and Kyle had the same free period each day, just before lunch. Kyle noticed Stacy's interest in continuing her workouts, so he suggested she use the school's weight room on Tuesdays and Thursdays when it was available. "It'll be a change for me to work out with you instead of the sweaty guys I usually lift with at the gym. Plus, I might be able to help with your routines," Kyle proposed. It sounded like a good plan, so that's how Stacy ended up spending 2 hours each week with Kyle. Then, one day in February, Kyle surprised Stacy during their workout session. "I've been writing a short novel. I finished the first draft and wonder if you could read it and give me your thoughts," Kyle revealed. Stacy responded just as Kyle hoped, treating him with respect. "Sure, I'd love to. What's it about?" "It's a fight story, but I'd rather not give too much away. I want you to read it without any preconceived notions," Kyle explained. "I can do that. I'll bring it after last period. Thanks." That night, while Rick was at work and after Amy had gone to bed, Stacy started reading Kyle's short novel about a Navy SEAL in Iraq. She got through the first half before Rick returned home. Stacy could have finished it then, but she slowed down to jot down notes in the margin for Kyle's second draft. The main character, Tyler, felt oddly familiar to Stacy, almost like a blend of Turner and Kyle. The following evening, with Rick at work again and Amy asleep, Stacy delved into the second half of the novel. This part included a chapter where Tyler had some steamy experiences while on R&R in Italy. The scene was so intense that Stacy found herself dropping her editing pen and slipping her fingers into her PJ bottoms without even realizing it. During his previous R&R trips, Tyler never struggled to find a good woman to spend his time with, but the 3 weeks he spent in Italy after 5 months of fighting the Taliban surpassed all his expectations. It all began on the first night in Amalfi. Tyler and Greg North were relaxing in a cozy cafe after dinner when two young ladies approached them. "Are you two Americans?" asked the brunette, who spoke English well but had a slight French accent. After introductions were exchanged, it turned out the women were indeed French. Michelle, the brunette, seemed particularly interested in Tyler, while Leslie, the blonde, focused on Greg. They enjoyed drinks together and then hit a nightclub, dancing until 3 a.m. Eventually, Tyler and Greg escorted the ladies to the dock where their small yacht was docked. "Is this yours?" Greg inquired. Leslie replied, "It belongs to my father. He's letting us use it for the month. Why don't you come back tomorrow morning and we'll go for a cruise?" Tyler and Greg felt a bit let down that they weren't asked to stay the night, but they agreed to come back the next morning. Little did they know it would be the last time they'd feel disappointed for the next 3 weeks. As they made their way down to the dock the next morning, they held their breath, hoping the yacht would still be there. Fortunately, it was, and the two women were already on deck, wearing matching blue bikinis and signaling for them to come aboard. Within minutes of stepping onto the yacht, each man had a drink in hand. The women had shed their tops, and the boat was sailing out of the harbor. Tyler couldn't help but feel grateful for what was shaping up to be an incredible day. Without staring too much, he admired Michelle standing on the flying bridge, wearing just the bottom of her bikini, which barely covered half of her perfect backside. It was evident she took care of herself, with her brown hair tied back in a ponytail and her blue eyes shielded behind stylish aviator sunglasses. It was a gorgeous day out on the Mediterranean, with calm blue waters and the sun shining brightly. Once the boat was far enough from shore for some privacy, both women decided to go skinny dipping, dropping their bottoms without hesitation. Tyler and Greg followed suit, stripping down and joining them in the water. Michelle swam over to Tyler and wrapped her legs around his waist. Because both of them were lean, Tyler had to paddle hard to keep them afloat. "This isn't going to work, huh?" she giggled, her accent making her words sound even more alluring. "Let's head up to the swimming deck." They made their way to the back of the boat, where Tyler sat on the edge of the platform, his legs dangling in the water. He reached out and effortlessly lifted Michelle out of the water, impressing her with his strength. It was clear that Tyler's muscular physique wasn't just for show. There was real power behind those muscles. Once Tyler and Michelle returned to the boat, Greg and Leslie emerged from the cabin, still completely nude. Leslie pulled Michelle aside for a moment, and when they rejoined the group, Greg and Tyler were left wondering what was coming next. "Michelle and I were thinking it'd be awesome if you guys joined us for the next 3 weeks, touring around the Mediterranean on our boat. We'll head back to shore, you can grab your stuff, and then we'll set sail together. How does that sound?" Tyler and Greg exchanged a glance, silently agreeing before both enthusiastically responding, "Heck yeah!" And so began the most daring R&R adventure either of the two SEALs had ever embarked on. Stacy continued reading, finding the following pages filled with detailed descriptions of Tyler's encounters with Michelle. With each mention of Michelle's name, Stacy substituted her own, imagining herself experiencing the pleasure Tyler described in vivid detail. After reading the scene where they make love on the flying bridge and then lie down, gazing at the stars, Stacy reached her limit. She dropped the pages onto the bed and shut her eyes. 2 days later, when Stacy returned Kyle's draft, he could see it had the desired effect. Stacy blushed as she handed it to him. Did you enjoy it? Kyle tried to hide his smirk. I did. It's a fantastic story and a solid first draft. I made some notes and suggestions in the margins. It's not too much, right?
I wasn't sure if I should dial back the intimate scenes between Tyler and Michelle.
Stacy's cheeks flushed even deeper. Oh no, I think it was just right. There's nothing wrong with showing some passion between adults who agree. It adds excitement. That's what I've always believed. Passion between consenting adults can bring life to any story, whether it's in a book or in real life. Stacy caught Kyle's hint, which was about as subtle as a brick through a window. But oddly enough, it pleased her. If there was any question about Kyle's intentions, this conversation cleared it up. If Stacy wasn't married, Kyle would likely be with her that night. Stacy started pondering. Why did I tie the knot so young? Was Rick really the right fit for me? Compared to Kyle, Rick seems weak and gloomy. Kyle has faced danger bravely, while Rick hasn't encountered anything close to that. Stacy's feelings toward Rick deteriorated to the point where they hardly talked. Rick grew tired of being belittled, and their conversations were now limited to Amy's care and schedule. While the divide widened at home, the flirtation and closeness between Stacy and Kyle flourished at school. Danielle Miller, one of the teachers, observed the budding romance between Stacy and Kyle. Danielle, Kyle's neighbor and a biology teacher, had a brief fling with Kyle until he shifted his focus to Stacy. Danielle couldn't stand Stacy, with her slender figure, pretty face, and blue eyes. It stung even more when Kyle abruptly ended things with her to pursue Stacy. Adding insult to injury, Stacy was chosen over Danielle to be the women's tennis coach this spring. Kyle made several errors, mixing work with pleasure, abruptly ending things with a jealous ex, and not realizing her influential connections. Her uncle was a U.S. congressman. A week after Danielle contacted Uncle Fred, she had all the information she needed. As she observed their escalating romance, she patiently waited. She planned to strike once their affair was confirmed, intending to disrupt two lives. 6 weeks had passed since Stacy read Kyle's story, and 6 weeks of playful flirting followed. Kyle decided he had waited long enough. It was time to make a move. Stacy, enough teasing. I'm booking us dinner for Thursday night. I know about your book club from your planner. We'll dine at Carmen's and then head to the Hilton across the street. I'll show you a level of intimacy you've never experienced. Stacy didn't resist Kyle's directive. She admired his assertiveness, contrasting it with Rick's passivity. Rick always asked, Kyle took charge. But she had a question. Why the hotel? Why not your place? Because I have neighbors in my complex, including 3 other teachers. I assume you prefer privacy. Not yet, at least. Not while you're still married to that loser. Stacy smiled at Kyle's thoughtfulness, overlooking his insult towards Rick. Meanwhile, Kyle inwardly smirked. Once again, he painted a future with a woman without committing. He had no intention of settling down, just enjoying a few months with Stacy before moving on. Stacy was running late for practice, knowing the girls would be waiting, so she decided then and there. It's a date. Thursday morning found Rick and Stacy in the kitchen, sipping their coffee. Amy was munching on her cereal, as messy as ever. Rick, don't forget I have book club tonight after tennis practice. You'll need to pick up Amy from Mom's before 6 and feed her. I'll be back by 10. I got it. What book are you discussing tonight? Stacy hesitated at the question. Was this some kind of test? She took a sip of coffee to gather herself before responding, but there was still a sharpness in her voice. Water for Elephants. Why do you care? You don't usually give a damn about my book club. Rick was a bit surprised by Stacy's tone, but recognized it mirrored her recent attitude toward him. Didn't mean anything by it, just trying to be polite. With that, he grabbed his lunch, kissed Amy's head, and bolted out of the house before things escalated further. Rick's sudden departure didn't escape Stacy's notice. Initially, she felt irritated by his exit without a goodbye. Then it dawned on her how she likely hadn't exchanged any kind words with Rick in weeks. Just before first period, Kyle popped into Stacy's classroom. He scanned the room to ensure privacy. We've got a table reserved at Carmen's for 6, and a room booked across the street at the Hilton. Don't be tardy for dinner. I know you've got to head back home tonight, and I've been waiting months for this chance to have you all to myself. I need to be home by 10. Should we skip dinner? Stacy chuckled softly, mindful that the door was still open. Nice try, pal, but I'm looking forward to a decent meal with a couple of glasses of wine and no kids. And afterwards? Same goes. Now scram. Stacy couldn't fathom how she managed to keep her composure all day, even through tennis practice. She dismissed the team a few minutes early, just before 5 o'clock. Everything proceeded according to plan. Following tennis practice, Stacy waited until all the girls finished in the locker room before swapping her sweats for the little black dress she last wore when Rick treated her to the Crystal Room for New Year's Eve. Was that almost 3 years ago, back when they had the cash for such outings? It marked the last time she donned the CFM 4-inch heels with thigh-high black stockings. Giving herself one final once-over in the full-length mirror, Stacy knew Kyle Turner would appreciate what he'd see tonight, especially when the dress came off. She gazed at her reflection, attempting to reassure herself. I deserve this. Her school clothes were packed in the small travel case. She'd shower and change at the hotel before heading home. Her hair was neatly styled in a ponytail, eliminating the need to wash and dry it afterward. After locking up the building, Stacy headed toward her car when a blue Honda pulled up. Angel Martinez, one of the senior tennis team members, practically leaped out of the Honda. Mrs. Wilson, thank goodness I caught you before you left. I left my ethics class textbook and notes in my locker, and I have a test tomorrow. Can you let me in so I can get it, please? Stacy was embarrassed getting caught by one of her students dressed like this. She told Angel to follow her and walked back to the locker room with Angel chattering all the way. Mrs. Wilson, you look so elegant tonight, on a weeknight. Are you and Mr. Wilson celebrating something special tonight, like an anniversary or something? Before Stacy could answer, Angel kept on chattering. I used to be so embarrassed whenever my mom and dad went out like that. Mom would be wearing something kind of candid, and Dad would have on a nice sports coat. They'd come home, and it was like, get a room because they'd be hugging and kissing. And me, I was at that age where you can't stand the thought of your parents doing it, right? Angel's voice grew louder as Stacy remained by the door while Angel rummaged through her locker. Returning with her book and notebook, Angel continued speaking. Then, when I got old enough to figure it out, I was kind of proud of them. Here they are after almost 20 years together and 3 kids, and they're still in love. How cool is that? As they reached their cars, Angel met Stacy's gaze directly. Have fun tonight, Mrs. Wilson. I've seen your husband. He's a hunk. No wonder you two still have it all going on. And with that, she drove away. Standing beside her car with the door open, Stacy couldn't hold back her tears. She sobbed uncontrollably, speaking to herself. What a stupid, selfish damn fool I've been. I deserve this. That's what I told myself. What I deserve is to lose my family for what I considered doing. When did I become so selfish and self-centered? Stacy's questions lingered in the air, unanswered. It took her a good 10 minutes before her tears cleared enough for her to start driving home. She was so overwhelmed that she didn't even notice how she was dressed. All she wanted was to hug her husband and child. Rick had spent the day feeling down. How did his life become such a burden? Where was the joy? The bills just kept piling up. The little things that once made life worth the struggle had mostly disappeared, especially the love he and Stacy once shared. He had managed to push through for most of the past 2 years. He felt he owed it to his little girl to stay strong. But since at least February, Stacy couldn't meet his eyes or show him the affection he needed. Rick left work earlier than usual, thinking, forget this. He considered stopping at the pub for a drink before going to his mother-in-law's to pick up Amy. Instead, he chose to head straight home and enjoy a couple of hours of peace and quiet. It turned out to be a big mistake. Rick grabbed the mail from the mailbox near the street and made the mistake of opening 2 envelopes marked past due. How embarrassing. He went inside, read both notices, and wondered how he would come up with another $1,500 by the end of the month. Passing by the refrigerator with its 2 cans of cheap beer, Rick reached up to the top cabinet above the stove where they kept a bottle of bourbon for when the Colonel visited. An overwhelming sense of despair and sadness washed over him after he took the first shot of liquor. He poured himself a second shot. For the past 3 months, Rick had been thinking a lot about it. He knew the why, he knew the how. The only decision left until this evening was the when. Why? Well, the primary reason. Rick would be more valuable dead than alive. The Wilson family's desperate financial situation would be alleviated by an infusion of money once the life insurance was paid out. Another reason. Life simply wasn't worth living anymore. Rick was exhausted from playing Sisyphus, constantly pushing the boulder up the hill only to have it roll back down every time. It was bearable when he did it as a team, with Stacy by his side, lightening the load with her smiles and love. But for at least the past 6 months, he had been pushing that boulder up the hill all alone. As for the how, this required much more consideration. It couldn't appear to be an ending. For two reasons. It would be devastating for Amy if she ever found out her father had taken his own life. The second reason was financial. Rick's $250,000 life insurance policy would pay double if the death was ruled an accident. The perfect solution, like so many perfect solutions, was right in front of him. Every day on his way to and from town, Rick passed Dead Man's Curve. Dead Man's Curve earned its name after a second car tumbled off the cliff into the ravine below. It was a treacherous part of the old road connecting downtown to the neighborhood where the Wilsons lived. Long ago, the city had to create an alternative route to downtown because the highway department couldn't make the curve safe. They thought about closing the road, but people complained since the new route took an extra 12 minutes to get downtown. The city kept it open, installed a basic guardrail, and dropped the speed limit to 15 miles per hour. As for when, that question was settled as Rick downed his second shot of bourbon. "No time like the present," he might have said aloud, but with no one else in the kitchen, it might as well have been just in his head. Rick grabbed his pickup keys, knowing the truck could easily break through the weak guardrails on the curve. Rick paused as he reached for the door. He wondered if 2 shots of bourbon would push his blood alcohol level high enough to be considered legally impaired, and if that would mess with the insurance payout. Deciding it wasn't worth the risk, he rushed back inside, threw up, rinsed his mouth, and cleaned and stored the shot glass. 10 minutes later, Rick was in his truck with the engine running, psyching himself up to drive around the notorious curve. Stacy, in a hurry to get home before Rick can change out of her risque outfit, decided to take the old road shortcut, which she seldom used. As she approached the curve and slowed down, she saw Rick's truck on the other side, heading in the wrong direction from her mother's house. Just as Rick's truck began to move, Stacy honked her horn loudly. Rick hadn't seen the other car coming when he decided to go ahead with his plan. He shifted his foot from the brake to the gas and released the clutch, starting to move. Suddenly, he heard a noise that snapped him back to reality and saw a car driving towards him. Startled, Rick hit the brakes hard. Why was Stacy's car here? He peered out of his open window and saw Stacy's car right next to his. "Rick, what are you doing here?" Rick just shook his head, feeling numb and disconnected, almost as if he were in a trance. He couldn't focus on Stacy's words. "Rick, where is Amy?" Panicked by a sudden awful thought, Stacy leapt from her car and rushed over to Rick's truck, peering inside. Rick hadn't responded. He just gazed at his wife, noticing her dress. "Richard, come home. We need to talk." Stacy drove back to their place and waited until he turned his truck around before trailing him home. Once inside, she swiftly changed in their bedroom and joined Rick at the kitchen table 5 minutes later. She quickly dialed her mother. "Mom, can you watch Amy tonight, please?" Then took a seat. Before she could utter a word, Rick spoke up. "You look nice tonight. Haven't seen that dress since before Amy. Skipping book club, huh? You got a date?" It wasn't the time for lies. "Yes, I did. I'm sorry." Stacy's tears welled up. Her crying didn't soften Rick's mood. He was angrier and more upset than ever before. "You packing up?" Stacy realized the gravity of the situation. "No, no way. I want to stay. Please, I know I messed up and I know things have been rough, mostly because of me. I want you to know I want to fix our marriage and I never cheated on you physically. But you've been emotionally cheating, right?" "Yes, I'm sorry, and I'm ashamed." "Tell me about it and tell me who he is. Then I'll decide if there's a shot for us." Stacy spilled everything to Rick, not holding back, including what made her change her mind. Rick listened quietly. When Stacy finished, apologizing once more, she couldn't wait any longer. "That's all of it, Rick. Now it's your turn. Why were you at the curve?" Rick confessed how he felt like giving up and planned to end it tonight. Before he could finish, Stacy was in his arms, crying on his shoulder. She looked into his eyes, pleading. "Please, Rick, I love you. Let's commit to each other again and try to be friends and lovers like before. I can't imagine life without you." Rick was relieved to hear Stacy's desire to stay together, but had to ask. "How do we do that?" "First, we swallow our pride and ask for help. Not much pride in trying to off oneself, and forgive me, and none in planning to meet a lover in some hotel, so pride shouldn't be an issue. Who do we ask for help?" Rick's words about the hotel hurt, but Stacy knew she deserved it. "We'll ask Mom. Last time she offered to lend us money, we were too proud to accept. She inherited money from Grandpa. It's in CDs. She said she'd lend us what we need at 3% interest, same as what she's getting from the bank. And we won't have to pay back the principal until we're stable. We'll use most to pay off debts except the mortgage, and some for marriage counseling. We need help, Rick. We can't handle this alone. Rick didn't agree right away. They spent the next week weighing the pros and cons. Finally, they agreed, realizing they needed a third party to tackle their trust issues. How could Rick trust Stacy again after her emotional affair and almost cheating? Just the thought made him feel sick. And how could Stacy trust Rick? He nearly took his own life. Could she rely on him for her and their daughter's safety? She struggled with the fear of what he might do. Before all this, other events reached a climax. Friday morning, during Stacy's free period, chaos erupted. Kyle stormed into Stacy's classroom furious. Unaware of the students in the back, he unleashed his anger. "Where the heck were you last night? I got stood up at the restaurant, sitting there alone like a fool, and I even paid for the hotel room, waiting there, hoping you'd show up." The two students fled the room, startled. Kyle should have left, but he continued his tirade. His ranting caught the attention of the vice principal, who intervened. "Miss Wilson, Mr. Turner, my office now!" she yelled over the commotion. News of the argument spread rapidly, although it got twisted along the way. Danielle Miller seized the opportunity to reveal Kyle's military background, courtesy of Uncle Fred. Anonymously, she disclosed that Kyle Turner served as a clerk stateside, not the heroic image he portrayed. People felt deceived by Kyle, even though it was more of a lie by omission. Any sympathy he had vanished quickly. His outburst in front of students and threatening remarks sealed his fate. Without tenure, Kyle was dismissed that very afternoon. Stacy's situation was less severe. She received counseling but was allowed to remain with a warning to avoid future incidents. Stacy's mother did lend them the money, which they used to pay off their debts. They also started seeing a marriage counselor, who helped them reconnect and rediscover their love. A pivotal moment came a couple of months later during a visit to Stacy's parents. While in the den with her father, Stacy's raised voice caught everyone's attention in the kitchen. "Papa, it wasn't Rick's fault the economy went downhill and Amy was born premature. He supported my decision to quit my job and go back to school. He works over 50 hours a week at a job he hates just to help us stay afloat. He's been nothing but a loyal husband and a great father. If you can't respect a man like that, then I feel sorry for you. If I hear one more negative comment about my husband from you, you won't see me or your granddaughter again." Stacy rushed into the kitchen, took Amy from her mother's arms, and told Rick they were leaving. "I won't tolerate his insults anymore. Sorry, Mom." She headed out the door and put Amy in her car seat. Rick kissed his mother-in-law on the cheek before following Stacy with a big smile. It was the first time Stacy had ever stood up to her father on Rick's behalf. Describing how that one incident altered Rick's sense of self-worth is difficult. However, the newfound belief in his marriage and in himself spurred him to seek out a better job, with Stacy cheering him on. Just 3 months after the incident with the in-laws, Rick landed a job as the head of corporate sales at a growing credit union. With the economy on the upswing, his salary and bonuses combined to surpass his previous income. Fast forward 2 years from that unforgettable evening at the Curve. Through careful budgeting, the Wilsons managed to pay off more than half of what they owed Stacy's mother. A year of counseling equipped them with the tools needed to build trust in each other again. Now, Stacy didn't fret when Rick went out with Amy, and Rick felt at ease on Stacy's book club nights. One evening, returning home, Rick found his favorite meal cooking and Amy away at her grandparents'. The colonel had learned to keep quiet, respecting his wife's demand to stay silent if he wanted to spend time with his granddaughter. Stacy motioned for Rick to take a seat. "Rick, I've been thinking things through and I've got a plan. I want us to have a second honeymoon and expand our family with another child." Rick was taken aback by both of Stacy's requests. "Can we afford to do either of those?" Stacy was relieved Rick didn't outright reject the idea. "I've been looking into it and we can get a 6-day, all-inclusive trip to Jamaica for under $2,000. Rick grinned, imagining the prospect of spending 6 days alone with his wife. It had been 4 years since they had more than just a night to themselves. "All right, go ahead and book it if you haven't already. Now about this second child idea. We always talked about having 2 kids. I got worried after Amy's health scare, but I spoke to my doctor, and she said there's less than a 5% chance our next child would be premature. Most women who had a premature first baby go full term with their second. Plus, my school insurance covers a lot more now. Even if there are problems, most of it would be taken care of." "Can I say yes to the vacation now and think about the second child later?" Stacy agreed. And that's how they ended up back on the same Jamaican beach 4 weeks later. On the plane ride there, Rick surprised Stacy. "Let's skip the birth control this week, babe. Maybe we'll get lucky and give Amy a little brother or sister." Stacy was speechless, tears welling up as she hugged and kissed Rick. "Thank you." If Rick wondered whether this trip could surpass their honeymoon, he didn't need to worry. Within 5 minutes of settling into their loungers, Stacy had already taken off her top. At dinner that evening, Stacy wore candid sundress imaginable. On the third morning, Stacy woke Rick up soon after sunrise and dragged him to a section of the beach they hadn't explored before. Stacy completely surprised Rick when she removed her bikini top and bottom before running into the warm water. Rick snapped out of his daze, dropped his trunks, and joined Stacy. As they treaded water, Rick couldn't help but ask, "How did you find out about this?" "That woman I was chatting with last night, Janice, told me. She and her husband come down here most mornings." "Is this allowed?" "Janice said as long as you're dressed by 9 when the locals show up, no one cares. But she did warn us to keep an eye on our suits back on the beach. One couple got a surprise when some kids ran off with their suits." Rick didn't like the thought of being stranded without clothes, wondering how they'd make it back to their resort if they lost everything. "Let's swim closer to shore, just in case." Stacy chuckled before turning and swimming backstroke toward the shore. When Rick caught up with Stacy, he had a question. "Do you think we'll bump into your friend and her husband?" "Not if we're gone by 8. That's why I woke you up so early." They spent the next 30 minutes skinny dipping, kissing, and embracing. Not wanting to risk it, they put their swimsuits back on and jogged back to the resort. Once in the room, they undressed, showered, dried off, and returned to bed. It's possible their second child, a boy they named Richard Jr., was conceived that morning. 8 months after returning from Jamaica, Stacy was sitting in her classroom preparing for first period when she received a surprise visitor. She looked up from her notes to find Angel Martinez standing in the doorway. "Mrs. Wilson, may I come in?" "Of course, Angel. What are you doing here?" "I'll be here at Lincoln for the next 12 weeks as a student teacher. I'll be in Mr. Bauer's classroom teaching chemistry." Stacy rose up and awkwardly hugged her ex-student, awkward because her belly held the baby. "That's wonderful. Mr. Bowers is a fantastic teacher. You'll learn a lot from him. And if you need me for anything, I'll be here for another couple weeks, I hope." "Excuse me for saying, Mrs. Wilson, but you look ready to deliver any moment. I'm so happy for you and Mr. Wilson." "Yes, we're blessed." When Stacy said it, she was actually thinking of how blessed she was that Angel forgot her ethics book all those years ago. School was about to start. The two women hugged, and Angel left the room. "Thank you, Angel," Stacy softly whispered, not loud enough for Angel to hear. Years later, on the night before Amy's wedding, Stacy sat down with her daughter and confessed how close she came to cheating. She explained how their financial struggles led her to feel disillusioned and entitled, almost making a devastating mistake that could have torn their family apart. Stacy shared how they worked hard to rebuild trust in their marriage, and how grateful she was that Amy's dad forgave her and gave their marriage another chance. Both mother and daughter ended up hugging and crying. The next morning, just hours before the wedding, Amy approached her father. "Dad, Mom told me about what happened years ago. I guess she wants me to learn from her mistakes, but she didn't tell me why you stayed with her." Rick wasn't surprised that Stacy shared her story with Amy. Although he forgave her a long time ago, Stacy never fully forgave herself. It was typical of her to use her own mistakes to caution Amy against life's temptations, even if it meant exposing her own flaws. "Well, if your mom had gone into that hotel room, things would have been much harder, maybe even impossible, but she didn't. And not only did she say sorry for almost cheating, she apologized for everything leading up to that night. Most of all, I thought about what life would have been like without you and your mom. I'm sure I would have been really lonely and sad. Instead, I've been happier these past 20 years than any man deserves, especially considering how close I came to messing it all up." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say our marriage hit a rough patch. Today's not the right day to go into all the mistakes your dad made or almost made. Let's focus on having a great wedding, and I promise someday we'll sit down and I'll tell you why your mom is the best wife ever." Amy reluctantly agreed, silently promising herself that she'd buy her dad that drink soon and hear his story. Rick pondered whether he'd share the whole truth with Amy, the secret he'd never told anyone else. A couple of days after Stacy's confession, Rick stormed into Kyle Turner's apartment, ready to confront him, only to discover that Turner had already skipped town